The 2023 Los Angeles Rams. It's
I don't know,
it's
man.
been a literal and figurative hangovers for the 2022 Rams. I think that you could just feel it throughout the entire season. And it started in week 1. Even before everyone got hurt, it just felt like there was something that was off. And the way that they got pushed around by the Bills, and then the injuries just started piling up, and it was a disaster. And so my kind of question about this and where this team is this the beginning of something, or is this the end of something?
That's fair.
That's my question.
Yep.
And Sean McVay coming back and kind of rededicating himself to this team and like, all right, I'm back. This is it. I'm back. Is this the first chapter in the is this the first kind of bit of the next story of the Rams, the new story for the Rams, where they're turning the page and they have this young defense and we kind of move into this next phase of McVay's career with this team? Or when they move on, or when the book closes on Matthew Stafford and Kupp in the next couple of years and Aaron Donald, we're going to look back on this as the end? That's my question. And I don't know the answer. Everything they're saying, the vibes when you're there, the energy at practice when I was there early in camp was phenomenal.
Yeah.
It was really, really good. And we'll see if that holds up. When you're 2-6 in week 9, it's a little bit harder to be, we're all loving each other, things are going great.
Right.
So I think that's what they want. And I think that they're telling themselves the right things, and the mantras and everything else they're trotting out right now, they can pull it off. But we'll see what happens when shit actually starts to hit the fan and you start losing a couple games.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to sum it up, is how when things get rough, how's this team going to look? I kind of, how I looked at it is like, which Matrix sequel are they? Are they Reloaded, Revolutions, or Resurrections? Like what scale are we at with McVay right here? Because I originally wrote Rebuild, Reload, or Revamp. Like what coach are you right now? Like, and I'm just curious. We've only seen, he's hit the ground running with the Rams. They went 11-5 his first year in 2017 off the top of my head. They were a Super Bowl contender the next couple of years. They had the kind of blip of 2020 or 2019, 2020, no, 2019. And then 2020, they kind of hit a walls on offense, but had an awesome defense. And it's kind of like, that was a different taste. Then you got the Stafford experience. So it's like, what is this next chapter? Like, I'm curious, like, deep down, I don't think you'd ever say it, but it's like, what are your goals, Sean McVay, like this year? Like, what are you trying to accomplish this year? Like, what would you say is a good goal for you guys this year? And
they have teams will win. They want to win games. I think that they want to be better than people expect them to be. They're over under 6.5. I think they believe they're going to be better than that. I think his goal is to kind of fall back in love with the process again.
I think so.
And to understand why you wanted to be a football coach.
Yes.
The guys that they hired, Michael LaFleur,
I have some on offense I'm going to talk about with that.
The coaches that they hired, I've talked about this with Jordan. They hired 2 guys that I think are kind of indicative of this. They hired this guy, Nick Caley, to be their tight ends coach.
Mm-hmm.
Nick was the tight ends coach in New England forever. And Sean said something to Jordan on the play callers I thought was particularly notable. He said he had so much respect for Belichick and the discipline it takes to come back every season and face it with that renewed energy and just completely dismiss everything that had come before. And it wasn't about what you had accomplished, and it wasn't even about the tangible goals you could accomplish that year. It was about the process of doing it every single day.
Yeah.
And Caley comes from New England. And the fact that he's bringing one of these guys in who did that every single year was a blank slate. We're starting over again.
Yeah.
There's something to that. And then Ryan Wendell, their offensive line coach, was the center on a lot of those Patriots teams.
Yeah.
So kind of taking that general approach and mindset about what the NFL is and how it is a day-to-day, what am I going to give my players and my staff every single day? Not it's about all these ultimate goals that I want to achieve. He did that, and it wasn't as rewarding as he wanted it to be. So I think it's about resetting it and about saying, every day, what am I pouring into the people around me? And can I find purpose in that? I think that for him would be success this year.
That's fantastic. I love it. He's just such a fascinating person to me because I just have so much respect for him. McVay, I mean, and just with Belichick, I've heard stories that they would have the championship parade, which one, but they'd have the championship parade. And right after the parade, he'd be like, hey, like, we're already behind, guys, like to his coaches and stuff. Hey, we got to start. Hey, we're behind on scouting, guys, because we were in the playoffs for so long. And when I was in the thick of it, I was like, oh, well, that takes the fun out of it. But now as I've gotten older and I kind of just see the good and bad of all leadership and read more about it and hear more about experiences, there is something to that when the guy at the top's going like, hey, next day, next play, next everything. And it starts at the top. It always starts at the top. And I think that's really cool that McVay is back to square one. And once we get into the offensive notes, I can talk about that because it's something I noticed at practice as well. And so I think that's a very, very great way that you just put it all. I think that's such an interesting, they're fascinating to me because of that.
So let's get to the offense. What is the biggest question you have about the Rams offense this season heading into the year?
How much is old is new again? Like, I really think that he's going back to year one as with the Rams, the 2017 version of the Rams. Just what the stuff I saw them running in the practice. And I talked to Jordan about this a little bit. She asked me, she's like, see if you notice anything when you're watching them. I think with the year with Stafford, when they won the Super Bowl, they, in a good way, found a whole new version of their offense, new ways they were attacking. And then last year when injuries cropped up, they kind of tried to do best of both worlds. And it was just a mess overall. They also had just incredibly bad luck with injuries.
Historic. The most injured offensive line since Football Outsiders started doing adjusted games lost. It's a 20-year sample.
Yes. And just they were 32nd in adjusted games lost, just offense overall. I didn't know this was that Kevin O'Connell poached the trainer from the Rams last year.
Well, they've lost a lot of their sports science guys.
I didn't know that.
Their sports science guy, I believe, was with them for a couple of years, is now with the Eagles. Because I assume he got because they were healthy consistently. And I think that there are teams around the league that are smart and have resources and are willing to throw any money they can at keeping their players healthy, because there's no salary cap on what you can pay your training staff.
The two Super Bowl teams were the two healthiest offensive lines. It's like, and then the year before that, the Rams had a super healthy offensive line. It's like it really helps. Tyler Williams was the guy that was with the Rams that went to the Vikings, but that was just something I just noticed that was interesting. But watching their play action game, the jet motion, all the under center stuff. Stafford prefers to be in the gun to operate that way. And I think McVay's going like, yeah, we're going back to the basics. Hey, we're going back. We're going back to the under center.
It's an easy sell. It's an easy sell. We want to protect you.
Yes. It's heavy play action. It's old school what we talked about with Anthony Richardson on the Colts preview was that it's these old school 2-man play action concepts. It is back to the basics. It is post over combos. It is hip formations, which is 2 tight ends, which is a classic heavy play action concept because you get the 2 tight ends to kind of help shore up the end. So now you get those heavy play action concepts down the field, which matches Stafford's arm. So I think really the number I would look at right here was from 2017 to 2020. So when Goff was the quarterback, the Rams would hover around 65% for their dropback. Their dropbacks would be from the gun, and which is kind of funny. It was like very consistent. It was like 64, 65, 64, 65. And then with the 2021 with Stafford, it was 80%. And then last year, it kind of dropped a little bit, kind of in between. I think it gets back to that 65% number. And I think it's going to be a good thing. They're going to shore it up. They're getting back to the basics. They went away from it. And I think that's going to be a good thing. But going to what you said about McVay getting back to himself, I think this is a huge component of that, going, like, let's get back to what worked and let's just add a couple tweaks to it.
They let the run game specifically die on the vine over the last couple of years.
Yes, they did.
It wasn't taken care of. It wasn't nurtured. And I think they got so obsessed with what the drop back passing game could look like with Stafford that they didn't take care to make sure that the run game was coming along. And after that Super Bowl year, I don't think they were nearly intentional enough about saying, how can we make sure that this can still be effective with the current way that we're playing? I don't think that'll happen again. They brought in a new offensive line coach. I think that there's going to be a renewed focus on making sure that we can play this way. They were 29th in rushing success rate last year. They averaged 2.8 yards a carry in the 2021 playoffs when they won the Super Bowl. This isn't isolated. It's like offensive line injuries. It's just been bad for a while. Yep. And so making sure that doesn't happen anymore, I think, is huge. And I wonder, is there a way to kind of get outside of your 11 personnel world and maybe use more tight ends? When they used a tight end as a fullback last year, they ran the ball very well. And so we mix up the personnel just a little bit to take care of our run game in a way that we didn't? And I mentioned Ryan Wendell, they hired as their offensive line coach. They were revamping all of that. So I think, talk about square one. The run game, in my opinion, is going to be back at square one. Can we do a little bit of everything? Can it be a little bit more varied? Can we make sure that that is no longer a defined weakness of this team? And can we tie it into what our passing game is? Can there be a little bit of communication between those two sides? Because I think for the last couple of years, they didn't give a shit. Because the passing game was so dynamic that it's like, who cares if those two sides are talking to each other?
They're an empty like 30 snaps a game. It's not, you can't really threaten the run game when you're an empty with Matthew Stafford as your quarterback.
But then you let that stuff atrophy. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Absolutely. That's a great call. And it's, they even noticing at practice was, and what frustrated me in September of last year, and I tweeted about it, was you can't just keep running these same run concepts over and over and expect a different result. Isn't that the definition of insanity? That's what the run game was doing. It's like, well, zone and duo were working back in the day, but defensive fronts have changed. And the fronts, the best type of run plays now are gap schemes because of just what the safeties being back and just the fronts that are given. And in practice, lo and behold, saw a couple gap schemes, saw a couple counter plays. So I'm curious too. I love that you brought up the tight ends as well. I saw a couple of those hip formations that I referred to. So even though they want to live in 11, I think McVay still believes in that. I think just finding this mix of going back to the basics, which is a couple of new tweaks for 2023. And I think that's going to be the math for them. And I just think from sheer luck, from what we brought up with the offensive line, I think they're just going to get a boost overall because it's just like, it can't get any worse than what it was last year. And they weren't even able to function at times.
It's very telling to me that the highest draft pick that this team has had since Jared Goff was spent on a 330-pound guard.
Yes.
That is a declaration of intent. We are going to have a slightly different feel to our run game. Steve Avila is the guy that I'm talking about. So Steve Avila steps in there. My question about the offensive line, we can get into this a little bit later when we talk about X factors. In my head, it was, all right, when they're healthy, things are going to be fine. You know, they had guys that were earmarked for these roles last year. Joe Noteboom got hurt immediately after stepping in for Andrew Whitworth as their starting left tackle. They drafted Logan Bruss in the 3rd round. He got hurt. They'd committed to Brian Allen as their center. They brought him back in free agency a couple of years ago. Everything that I've read, these are open competitions.
Yeah. The left tackle spot.
So it's between Joe Noteboom, who they paid, and Alaric Jackson, who was a guy off the street, essentially.
Jackson looked good.
So I wonder, I was like, is this just a, hey, no, you got to earn this? Like the way we played last year, no jobs are getting handed out. Is it a, man, maybe these guys aren't as good as we thought, and maybe the ceiling on the offensive line is a little bit lower? So I don't know how to approach this.
Yeah.
Because it worries me a little bit. Because my first thought was, when these guys are healthy, they can be a solid average offensive line, and this offense can be better than you expect. But now that these guys haven't like earned these roles and these jobs, I've got a little bit more of a question. Like now Bruss isn't even playing guard. He's the backup right tackle.
Yeah.
So the guy you had as a potential 3rd round guard, now he isn't even doing that. It's Tremaine Ankrum is their starting right guard. So maybe these guys are just better, and that's why they've gotten these jobs, and it'll be fine. But the names and the shuffling has me a little bit more worried about this offensive line than I would have thought.
The reading in between the lines, the context with it, the subtext with it all, you're like, huh, that's interesting. The left tackle battle is interesting because the Alaric is pretty like he's a road grader. Like, so I think they're trying to, like, as opposed to Joe Newboom, who's more of a, athletic type, even though he's coming off an Achilles and everything.
I think that's a question.
Yes. So I don't know if it's just a mentality thing, or anything like that. Like, hey, we want some beef throughout the offensive line. Let's match Rob Havenstein at right tackle. Shout out Big Rob. It was good seeing him at practice, by the way. He thought I had several people say they thought I was a coach because I was just standing there with like my hat on and everything like that. He walked up, he thought I was a trainer. And then he goes, "Oh, Nate, I know you." One of my old drinking buddies from Wisconsin, like, didn't even recognize me. Thanks, Rob. But no, I think just those are valid questions. I didn't realize it was a competition until I started prepping for my camp visits, and I was like, "Oh wow, they're wide open with all this." But I think
I also didn't realize
they're trying to
competition
until you went there, right? And
like, yes.
Did you guys just give Joe Noteboom like 30-something million?
Correct.
Yeah, I know. So. It's a valid question, though. It's a valid point to bring up.
The other point we're bringing up: what is going to happen at the other receiver spots? That's the other one where I'm just like,
spoilers for my X Factor.
Okay, all right. So we can save that then, because that was another one we're talking about. We know Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is great. What else is going to happen here?
outside of that, at every skill spot. That's
well,
really
we can dig into that.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Biggest question about the defense. I can go a bunch of different directions here. I don't even know how much of it's worth really digging into.
What's the future?
Yeah.
I mean, man,
I don't even know how they're going to play defense on this team this year. And I mean that like mindset wise.
Yeah.
Because last year it was just, we're not going to give up explosive plays. They were 28th in explosive play rate allowed, but they allowed a lot of completions. And they just allowed teams to kind of do what they wanted because I think
6 years at a time.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure that they were limiting those plays. I wouldn't be surprised if they were more aggressive this year.
Mm-hmm.
If the offense can be good and the offense can be a top 10-ish unit and kind of score enough points to keep you in games, is your defensive mindset, if we get an explosive here, an explosive there, if we can get a sack, if we can get a TFL, if we can get a turnover, it's just about giving our offense more opportunities. I don't think they're going to be this good offensively, but it's kind of the mindset that the Chiefs had early on in the Patrick Mahomes era, where they didn't have the horses on that side of the ball. So can we just create enough disruption? And the kind of way the Giants played last year with all their young DBs, where we don't mind if we get gashed every once in a while because we have to fight fire with fire here. So I wonder if there's more of that sort of mindset across the team, because look at the depth chart, man. I mean, these are all guys that you've never heard of before. And some got playing time last year. Darian Kendrick at corner, a couple of these other guys, Jordan Fuller's back there at safety, but we got Russ East was a starter until they signed John Johnson this week.
How you say Russ East kills me. I've heard you say it before. I think we did the show with Mina, and oh my god, just how you say Russ East kills me.
Russ East, Quentin Lake. I mean, these guys getting real run in practice. They signed Akel Weatherspoon for essentially nothing to be a starting corner for them. They're one of their starting outside linebackers is Michael Holt, who they transitioned from being a defensive tackle in the middle of last year. There is no proven talent on this team, essentially outside of Aaron Donald and maybe Ernest Jones and half of John Johnson. So I just wonder, they're just going to be holding on for dear life. That's it. And if you're going to be playing that way anyway, is it worth being a little bit more aggressive?
It's better to burn out than to fade away. It's really, I've always gotten so frustrated. Like Eagles fans get mad at Jonathan Gannon, like, oh, he doesn't blitz a ton and everything. It's like, yeah, because he has horses at every spot. Doesn't need to. It's the complete opposite. I think it's absolute. You're killing yourself if you play a basic structured defense, like we were talking about how the Rams were getting up 6 yards, 7 yards a pop. Just watch them. I think it was the Rams against the Saints, and just watch the Saints and Andy Dalton. I think it was just pepper 7-yard gains over and over and over and over, just on the outside, just over and over. It was easy. So when you have a talent like negative, when you have a negative talent compared to your competition, it is. Got to create chaos. You just have to. That's because otherwise you're just dying. Like you're just dying. Like you said, dying on the vine with the run game. You're just slowly dying throughout the game because you just can't hold up. You're asking your guys who are already at a, God, sorry, I'm blanking on the word, detriment.
No, at a disadvantage.
Thank you. 3, 2, 1. A disadvantage at defense, play after play, and they're not giving them any schematic advantage or any aggression advantage. That's how you overcome that. Otherwise, you're just going to let them just run all over you, gain big plays, even when you're trying to play sound. So I totally agree with you. You have to play aggressive with this defense, because I can honestly name 3 somewhat solid starters, and then it's just squinting, other than Aaron Donald, of course. And then it's just squinting about who these guys are, just like you listing off the names. There's so many rookies, not even just rookies, so many day 3 and undrafted rookies on this team. That's just scary through a 17-game season.
The number, this is an easy one to point to. So pass defense success rate last season, they were 28th in the league, but their DVOA and other things were higher than that because they just didn't give up explosive plays. But down in and down out, they just got shredded. The only teams worse than them last year in pass defense success rate were the Raiders, the Falcons, the Bears, and the Cardinals. That's it. And the worst teams in the league. The worst defenses in the league. And so I just think that not leaning into that style and being a little bit more aggressive with some of these young DBs is probably the way to go. Absolutely. All right. X factor for the 2023 Rams. Who do you got for me?
I already hinted at this, but a non-Cooper Kupp skill player. Just anybody step up. Anybody. Just need one emerge as a decent player. They just can't function with just Cooper Kupp as their guy. I mean, he's awesome, but it's just somebody. Van Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell.
DeMarcus
Zach
Robinson
Evans,
is there, apparently having a nice camp.
Shout out to Marcus Robinson. Yeah. I'm sorry, Cam Akers. I kind of know what you are, but just just anybody, just one of these guys step up and be a viable player. I think that's the X factor, because otherwise this offense, I think, will be stretches of frustrating because teams will wipe out Cooper Kupp from a game. And then it's just like, what else you got? So non Cooper Kupp skill player.
Left tackle, Joe Noteboom, whoever it ends up being. Who is the left tackle on this team going to be, and how does that guy play? Because in my mind, it was, if they're healthier, they'll be better. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe that group is still something to be worried about if these guys who we thought were supposed to be the starters last year aren't even being handed these jobs. So you can talk yourself into one way or the other, but I'm worried. And I think that having a little bit more consistency, reliability, stability along the offensive line is going to make or break this team, period. Because I do think that even with the questions of those other skill position players, the line is average and you have Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. I think that they can still be a good offense, but the line plays such a huge role in that.
Absolutely.
Breakout player for the 2023 Rams. Who do you got?
It's the only guy. It's like the only guy I can have. It's like Kobe Durant. I like him.
Who I have.
Yeah, I know, but it's like Ernest Jones. Maybe he's kind of, he had a great Super Bowl. People kind of know him. So Kobe Durant, nice, solid starter. I think he's a solid corner. I don't think he's anything more than like a number 2, but I like him. I think he's going to be
a nickel for them.
Yeah.
So he's the only corner and really the only DB outside of Jordan Fuller that they haven't really tried to actively replace this year. It feels like the other guys, they brought in John Johnson last week. They brought in Ahkello Witherspoon to play the other outside corner spot. I think even the spot opposite Ahkello Witherspoon is up for grabs right now with a couple different guys, Darian Kendrick and a couple other people that are there. But Durant, it feels like, has been the starting nickel from day one. The mid-round pick last year was a rookie, played well, played a lot. And so I think that would be a good guy to bet on in the secondary of all those guys.
Fun. He has a good nose for the ball. Like he's a very, very aware player. And it's really fun to watch a corner like that, especially a day 3 guy like that.
What does success look like for the 2023 Rams?
Finding someone on this team that's in their 20s that you feel good about. That's really just finding players. I think I really just wrote this. I think McVay just wants to feel at least average this year because of how terrible last season went. And I think he's getting back to the basics, which is what we've hinted at throughout the show and talked about. So I think just finding some players that they can really work with in the near future as they kind of go through this next stage of the McVay Rams.
Does it feel like you have new life? Everyone in the organization. And that, like you said, that includes finding young pieces you can build around. That's one aspect of it. Does the coaching staff feel that way? Is the arrow pointed up? Are you optimistic about the future after this season ends? Or like I said at the beginning, does it feel like the end of something and not the beginning?
Is this a Pedialyte year after the hangover from last year? You having some Pedialyte, maybe some eggs, some bacon, some toast, filling up the belly a little bit? That's what this season has to be. Let's get back to neutral.